Hey folks, my name is David and I usually make German lens and camera review videos. But today I decided to make one in English as well. Because we had the opportunity to play with Sony's brand new lens. The Power Zoom 16-35 4.0G. We got that lens some weeks prior to the release and put the lens through our usual tests. But what kind of lens is that anyway? What can it do? Where are the strengths, the weaknesses, and is it the right thing for you? I hope I can clarify all of this in this video. And if you realize in the end that you liked the content, then please leave a like under the video. Subscribe to our little English channel and show that bell some love. And I promise I will make more videos in English as well in the future. But for now, have fun with the intro and let's go. The new one here can be viewed as an extension to the Sony 24-105 4.0G. And as a 16-35 4.0, it's sure to be a great addition to cover everything from 16 to 105 mm with a constant aperture of 4 in 2 lenses. And if you're now asking yourself, a 16-35 with aperture 4.0 that already exists, yes, you are spot on. And almost everyone who has been using the Sony system for a longer time had this lens at some point. Me too, it's been a while, and I landed this one from a friend. But now there's an exciting new wide-angle zoom for Sony that I could faint at, because what we look at today is basically the indirect successor to the old one. The old, aged 16-35 ZA-OSS, which was created in cooperation with Zeiss, coming from my hometown Jena, Germany. It was presented in 2014, a year after the original Sony. That's 8 years old now. And even if the lens was able to hold its own against the 2.8G Master a few years ago in our German test, 8 years is a really long time for optical development. And a refresh is now just about time. There are also younger lenses that have been reissued by Sony, like the 70-200 2.8G Master. Despite the landscape photography or the architectural photography, what these 16-35 lenses are also very popular is filming, especially filming yourself in form of a vlog. So far, we always have used standard zoom lenses for this, but wide-angle lenses also have the advantage that they show less rolling shutter and generally less shaking in the wide angle. The old 16-35 also had an optical image stabilizer on board and therefore was very popular with this topic. But there's a catch, because newer cameras don't like the stabilized lenses so much anymore. Okay, that's not true, but it's not possible to use the afterwards image stabilization in the Catalyst Pro software on desktop when you have a lens that has an OSS inside. And all of that leads to this new lens, the PZ 16-35 4.0G, a new 16-35, this time without optical image stabilizer, without Zeiss, and instead from the still relatively affordable G series. All through, you have to put that in quotation marks and I explain you later why. But there's also another little feature that I really like about this lens. It has PZ in the name, which stands for Power Zoom, which means the lens does not change its focal length by physically turning the lens tube, and instead a motor changes the focal length, and that has a number of advantages. And so far there's no normal power zoom for full frame cameras, only the 28-135 4.0, which is big, heavy and expensive and aimed at video users. But let's take a look at the new one in the Spec Check. And there we come first to the price, and I explain you why you have to put the affordable in quotation marks. Because the PZ 16-35G should cost you a whopping 1,500 euros. And it should be delivered from April. That's a 50% increase compared to the current new price of the old one. But hardly anyone has to buy that one new, as it can sometimes be had for used 600 to 800 euro depending on the condition. Sony hasn't reached Canon RF price level yet, but everything is getting more expensive and the current world situation isn't causing the opposite either. But the new 16-35 also has some other advantages. It is small, very small. At only 88mm, it's about a centimeter shorter than the old one and a few millimeters narrower in diameter. The filter thread has remained the same at 72mm, which is of course very nice for all those people switching from the old to the new one. The big plus besides the size is the weight, because it's about 200 grams lighter than the old version. Just 353 grams is awesome for a lens like that, and that's despite the power zoom motor in the lens that has been added. The size and weight makes this lens so compact and handy that it has extremely good handling on the camera. It's a bit of a shame that it is only a 16mm in the wide angle, while Canon goes to 14mm and Nikon does too. Although Nikon doesn't have 35mm at the top anymore. However, given the large selection of Sony lenses, this makes perfect sense. If you need a wider angle, you can also buy another lens that Canon or Nikon doesn't have yet. With 16-35mm however, it may also make sense for APS-C if you have a Sony APS-C second body. You can catch two birds with one stone. You have a standard zoom for the APS-C one and a wide angle for your full frame camera. And for everyone who likes to film, or maybe sometimes even likes to film themselves, and also is into landscape photography or architectural photography, this is the lens for all occasions. Despite the size and weight, a more or less unnecessary aperture ring has also made it onto the lens, which snaps nicely into place on the A position and can also be locked down like I love it. And for cinematic aperture gradients, the aperture ring can also be switched to without clicks. So basically there's everything you could need on this small lens body. There's also a freely assignable button and a manual focus switch. Although the lens has a power zoom, there's additional to the zoom rocker a zoom ring, which now rotates freely and has a very pleasant adjustment in the photography mode, so that you never actually have to wait for the lens to zoom. However, the distance covered here for zooming is also significantly smaller than, for example, with the 18-105 APS-C lens. The focus ring is at the front of the lens and it's a bit too small for my taste, especially because I'm constantly grabbing the zoom ring instead of the focus ring if I try to manually focus. But it's also because this small lens is completely packed with controls for its size. When I've seen the new lens first time, it reminded me to the 20mm 1.8G. And that's a prime lens with fixed focal length. An extremely positive and welcome side effect of the power zoom is the fact that the tube no longer extends forward. The lens does never change its size. Nothing moves in and out, and so no dirt can get into the lens, which is, with a landscape photography lens, of course always an issue. The new lens is of course sealed against moisture and dust. But that was also the case with the old one. But many who know this lens know for sure how the zoom ring sounds when sand or something dusty got inside somewhere. Oh, don't you? Also, there was no rubber ring here sealing lens and body. On the optical side, the PZ 16-35 consists of 13 lenses in 12 groups, and 4 of these lenses are spherical, and 2 of these elements are ED lenses. Unfortunately, the aperture only consists of 7 rounded plates, but that's not bad because it's great for the Sunstar on the one hand, but maybe a little bit impractical for the bokeh on the other hand. Although with a wide angle zoom lens, bokeh is significantly less critical than the Sunstar, I would say. The close-up limit is 28 cm in the wide angle and 24 cm in the telephoto range. That's nothing special, but that's not what this lens is made for. The power zoom is absolutely silent, just like the autofocus. Perfect for filming. because Sony uses one of the new and good XD linear motors for both the focus and the zoom. That's no comparison to previous power zoom lenses for APS-C, for example. The manual focus has a linear focus curve, but unfortunately Sony still lacks the possibility to change the focus direction in the camera menu like all the other brands do. So far that sounds very good and promising. Somehow maybe a little bit too good, because such a compact and small wide angle zoom with really strong performance, that would be something I would buy again for Sony E-mode. But let's see if the performance is right and to what extent the lens can convince in direct comparison to its predecessor. When it comes to image sharpness, there really wasn't that much to complain about the Sony Zeiss 16-35. The real arguments for the new purchase in terms of sharpness are missing here in my comparison. From 16 to 20mm, both are very comparable and sharp even with wide open apertures. Here, however, it is also quite noticeable that the lenses obviously have very different focal lengths. If the Sony Zeiss is 60mm, the PZ-G is more like 13 or 14mm. But this is due to the lens correction being switched off. And we will come back to that in a moment. The PZ-G was obviously calculated with corrections in mind. A visible advantage in terms of sharpness can be seen with an open aperture from 24 to 35mm. Stopped down by just one stop, there is hardly anything left in difference, and both lenses are the same in my eyes in terms of sharpness. But of course, there are a few other topics that are also very interesting, important, and especially in wide angle lenses, I would say chromatic aberrations or image errors in general. Sony really tries everything here to let us see as little as possible. The correction profile is baked into the RAW file and cannot be deactivated. If you zoom in on the branches in the camera display, you can clearly see CAs. And if you import the image into the RAW developer software, everything is gone. Magic. Not so bad in principle, because lateral CAs are very easy to correct, and that also has no real disadvantages. Ultimately saving the lens maker effort and cost if you can get rid of them so easily by digital correction. I would just like to have some control over it myself to see what the lens does and what the correction does. Loca, on the other hand, in foreground or background blur is not recognizable for me here. However, this situation is completely different when it comes to distortion and vignetting, where lens corrections are also on the order of the day. Almost all lenses from all manufacturers are now calculated with this correction, which means that the lens maker already calculates with the possibility for lens corrections. The advantage of this, first of all, smaller and lighter lenses that could be significantly cheaper compared to if you have to solve the problems optically in the lens. Sounds good, right? Not so much. The problem here is that distortion correction from a certain point on has a very negative effect on the image. And this certain point is clearly reached here in the wide angle. At 60mm, this lens is a strong fisheye. Also significantly wider angled than 16mm, but you have to set the distortion correction to 55 in Lightroom. To 55, without any BS. That means a corrected RAW image of the Sony a7 IV would look like this if you get the lines straight at all. Of course, then we don't need all the white borders. So we crop the image, yes, crop. And this cropping turns the 33 megapixel image into an image with less than 24 megapixel. The distortion of this lens steals more than 1000 pixels of horizontal resolution from my image, or in other terms, more than a quarter of the total resolution. So all the resolution upgrade I got with upgrading from a7 III to a7 IV is gone now. I don't really know if that's fair to customers. Nobody tells you that you lose effective, usable resolution through a lens that distorts so much. and we have not often seen such a strong distortion and necessary correction. Canon's RF 14-35 was just as intense, but it's also 2mm wider angle on the way. In any case, the PZ is massively worse in this respect than the old Sony Zeiss, which hardly shows any problems, not even at 16mm. The power zoom G is fine from 24mm to 35mm, but from 16 to 20mm it is unacceptable in my opinion. But feel free to write in the comments how you see it. Did you actually realize that with such a strong correction you lose so much of resolution? That's over 25% of resolution, especially in landscape photography, when you like to have a lot of resolution, for example for consciously cropping. On an A7 III or A7 C, there are just 17 out of 24 megapixels left. I've said it again and again, this is a topic that I really don't like. And here it is giving me a real headache. But let's go further. Vignetting naturally comes with it. It's also very strong, extremely strong. You can clearly see why in this example here. If you remove the distortion, you also remove the vignetting, at least partially, through the additional required crop. The rest is corrected using the vignetting correction, and that is also destructive, but to a lesser degree. Because vignetting correction does nothing than brighten the corners. You lose some dynamic range, and if you have a picture that is already taken with a high ISO, for example, this can lead to significantly more noise in the corners of the picture. The power zoom G clearly loses the direct comparison with its predecessor in terms of vignetting in every possible focal length. But how crucial that is another question. If the correction is anyway a crucial, even essential role in this lens. But well, those are probably the pills you have to swallow if you want to have a small and lightweight wide angle zoom. The smallest and lightest of them so far by any brand. And of course, we also have some other points to evaluate with this lens. How about, for example, the bokeh? Okay, that's not the most important issue with a wide angle, but with a lens that should also have its purpose when filming yourself, then yes. The bokeh of the new PZ-G version is better in every possible way. It's rounder, clearer, cleaner, simply better. Since the close-up limit is also better, you can also separate the subject better at short distances. And the advantages don't stop there, because the direct light behavior of the new one is way better. It's not perfect, but it's much better. Let's start with the Sunstars. They are smaller and less burned out. They are much fancier, better and defined and clearer. Even if there are some that showed strange colors here and there. Overall, it's a clear win and plus. There has been a significant progress in ghosting, which is what you see when you point the lens at the light source. There's ghosting with the new one too, but it's less clear, more subtle, better, overall acceptable. The Sony Zeiss loses quite a bit here, especially at 16mm with this large circle that doesn't look nice, and I don't want this in my images with sun. And the Sony Zeiss also had problems with lens flares. These are the problems with scattered light from the side, and unfortunately the PZ-G also has them. First notice in practice when trying out the new lens, and could also be reproduced in the studio with a flashlight at any focal length above 20mm. Lens hood is more or less mandatory if you don't want to see something like that. It's just a pity that there are situations in which you can't use them with such a lens. For example, if you use a variable ND filter like many people do for filming or vlogging, or if you use a 100mm filter system. Best help here? Make a shadow with your hand. On the video side, however, the new lens has also some powerful advantages over the old Sony Zeiss. For example, the power zoom G is free of any focus breathing. And I mean without Sony's new electronic corrections of the Sony a7 IV. It's optically briefing corrected and briefing free. You notice this when you are focusing in video mode manually because the field of view does not change depending on the selected focal distance. When changing the focal length, it's also important that the lens is parfocal. That means the focus point is not changing when you are zooming. That was the case with the old one, and it's also the same with the new one. Both are parfocal. This is even more important here with the power zoom because you can change the focal length easily and smoothly even during video recording, and so you are very tempted to do so. I shot a few small vlog parts with this lens in the past few days and I really like it, but see it for yourself. Okay, this was all made with me talking German. But basically I talk about how this lens works best for vlogging. First, without extra stabilization, just using a7 IV's IBIS system. And then I switched to the steady shot active mode. And you can see a tighter crop, but way less shake. That's something that works very well for vlogging with this lens because of the wide angle. And the last thing here is me switching to APS-C crop mode and show the framing here. In practice, this lens is a lot of fun, especially for filming and also because the focal length is not only great for vlogging in full frame, but also because it's perfect in the APS-C crop mode of Sony's a7 IV, and then you can shoot 4K 60 slow motion B-roll. You have covered everything from 16 to 50mm for video use and can use the power zoom to create more dynamic recordings. For example here, I tried it in the studio with B-roll recordings of Canon's R5C for some of our next videos. And since the new Power Zoom G lens no longer has an optical image stabilizer, you can now also use the subsequent stabilization via Catalyst Pro's software. With this, a little bit of focal length is lost, yes, but that's not a problem thanks to the wide angle. It's really easy to use with electronic stabilization and ensures really nice results in this case. Apart from the fact that it's smaller, lighter, a lot of fun to use, sharper in some focal lengths, shows less ghosting, has no briefing, much nicer bokeh, but you shouldn't completely lose the distortion out of your head. And that's a pity. Especially if you want to use the lens less for filming and more for landscape photography or architectural use. You simply lose much resolution. And that's a very unwelcome aftertaste for this lens. For 1,500 euro, I would have expected a little bit more. But as I said, that's the pill you have to swallow with small and light lenses like this. But I still have to say that with this lens, I will probably get weak again. With a Sony lens. Not as a photo lens, but for filming, especially on photo trips. Because it's incredibly light, compact, strong, super usable with the stabilizations and made for the a7 IV because of the focal length. Also fits very good in crop mode. And also the a7C is an incredible small video combination. I just wished the a7C had more of the a7 IV in terms of video features. But maybe an a7C2 comes soon? I don't know. You have to decide for yourself whenever the lens is right for you or not. It clearly has its strength, but also some significant weaknesses. I hope my video was able to help you with your decision making. And if you think this lens is for you, then there are links to pre-order the lens down below the video in the description. And if you buy this lens through our links, you support our channel for free. And as I said, the first orders should be delivered in April, and if you would like to have someone quickly, you can hardly avoid pre-ordering at this time. But please let us know what you think of Sony's latest coupe in the comments. Or if you have any questions about this lens that still were unanswered. And if you liked the video, please leave a like under the video. That makes a huge difference in the YouTube algorithm and ensures that more people can see this video. And if you want to see more of us, please subscribe to this little English sub channel and hit the bell if you don't want to miss anything. And then I wish you always good light and hope to see you soon.